How did German fighters fail to bring down one huge, slow British flying boat? It was not a Spitfire twisting through the sky. It was not a fast bomber diving out of reach. It was a short Sunderland, a vast RAF Coastal Command flying boat, built for the long, dangerous work of the sea war. At first glance, it looked like the sort of target a German crew should have been able to destroy. Large, slow, and hard to hide against the water. The day before, over the same brutal stretch of air and sea, German aircraft had attacked BOAC Flight 777, a civilian airliner flying from Lisbon towards Britain. 17 people were killed, including the British actor Leslie Howard. So when, on June 2nd, 1943, another big aircraft appeared over the Bay of Biscay, it might have seemed exposed. It might even have seemed doomed. That was the mistake. This aircraft was not defenseless. It was short Sunderland, GR3EJ134, code UT:"N, from number 461 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force, operating under RAF Coastal Command. A flying boat the crews knew as N, for nuts. A machine later remembered as one of Britain's flying porcupines. 8 German Ju-88s came for it. The Sunderland was hit again and again. Its crew were wounded. One man would not survive. The aircraft was so badly damaged that its survival should have felt absurd. Yet, by the end of the fight, the exact score would be debated. The damage would become legendary, and one thing would remain clear. The Luftwaffe had found a target far easier to catch than to kill. Friends, let's pause for 1 second. Please subscribe to the channel. We are very close to reaching 1,000 subscribers. Help us get there, press the hype button, and let's continue. The Sunderland at the center of this story belonged to number 461 Squadron, RAAF, based at RAF Pembroke Dock in Wales. That detail matters. This was a British aircraft type operating inside RAF Coastal Command, flown by a crew that included Australians and RAF personnel. The story belongs to Britain's war at sea, but it also belongs to the wider Commonwealth effort that kept Britain fighting. Coastal Command did not have the glamour of Fighter Command in 1940. It did not have the public thunder of Bomber Command. Much of its work happened far from crowds and speeches. Patrols over empty-looking water, long searches for submarines, convoy cover where aircraft range allowed it, and dangerous flights across sea lanes where German aircraft and U-boats were part of the same struggle. The Atlantic was Britain's road to survival. Food, fuel, raw materials, men, aircraft parts, ammunition, and industrial machinery had to arrive by sea. German submarines tried to cut those routes. German aircraft added another layer of danger in the approaches and over the Bay of Biscay. For U-boats based on the French Atlantic coast, the Biscay routes mattered. Submarines moving to and from the wider Atlantic had to cross that maritime zone. To Britain, those waters were not a blank patch on a map. They were a corridor of risk. That was Sunderland country. The short Sunderland was not elegant in the fighter sense. It was not small, quick, or sharp. It was a 4-engined flying boat designed for range, endurance, crew space, and maritime patrol. Its job was to stay out over the sea for hours, to search, to report, to attack submarines when the opportunity came, to return with information even when nothing dramatic had happened. Endurance was its virtue. Size was part of the bargain, but size also made it a tempting target. A Sunderland could not dart away from fighters. It could not turn a meeting with Ju-88s into a fair duel.
It had to survive in a different way.
Through defensive guns, crew discipline, airframe toughness, low-level handling over water, and the hard mathematics of making an attacker pay for every pass. The nickname Flying Porcupine captured that idea. The exact origin of the nickname is repeated in different forms, and the safest version is not to pretend every detail of its birth is settled. But the meaning is clear. The Sunderland bristled, nose gun, tail guns, dorsal position, beam positions, hatch guns, overlapping arcs of fire around a huge aircraft that looked slow until the shooting started. It was not invincible. Sunderlands were lost. Number 461 Squadron paid heavily during the war. A machine does not need to be invincible to be dangerous. It only needs to make the attacker's work expensive. From a distance, the Sunderland looked like prey. Inside the attack run, it became geometry. Come from behind, and the tail mattered. Come from the side, and the beam guns mattered.
Try to find the weak angle,
And the crew might turn, drop lower, shift the field of fire, or bring another gun into play. The Sunderland could not choose the fight like a fighter, so it made the fight ugly. On June 2, 1943, EJ-134 left Pembroke Dock for patrol. Its captain was Flight Lieutenant Colin Braidwood Walker. Among the crew were Flying Officer Kenneth Simpson, Sergeant E.C.E. Miles, and Flight Sergeant R. Goode. Each name would soon be tied to a different part of the same desperate action. The patrol was not meant to become a legend. Most maritime patrols were built from repetition. Briefings, charts, fuel, weather checks, long hours, and the strange fatigue of staring at sea and sky until every mark on the horizon starts to matter. Then, without ceremony, routine could split open. That day already carried a shadow. On June 1, 1943, BOAC Flight 777 had been shot down over the Bay of Biscay.
The death of Leslie Howard
Brought attention because he was famous, but the tragedy was not only the loss of a famous passenger, it was the killing of 17 people on a civilian aircraft traveling toward Britain. The next day, Walker's Sunderland was searching the same dangerous air-sea world. Some accounts connect EJ-134's patrol with the search following that airliner loss. Whether the patrol is described mainly as anti-submarine work or as part of that wider search, the emotional edge is the same. The crew were flying over waters where a slow aircraft had just been destroyed. In the early evening, the danger arrived. 8 German Ju-88s were sighted. The Junkers Ju-88 was not a minor opponent. It was fast compared with the Sunderland, adaptable and deadly in trained hands. Against a large flying boat, the German crews had the obvious advantage of speed and initiative. They could choose the moment. The Sunderland had to answer it. At around 7 p.m., the attacks began. Air combat over the sea is never as tidy as a diagram. One aircraft comes in, guns fire, another lines up. Tracers cut through space. Damage appears before anyone fully understands what has failed. Men in different parts of a large aircraft see only fragments of the whole battle. EJ-134 was hit hard. The port outer engine was set alight. Fire on an aircraft changes everything. A damaged engine is a problem. A burning engine is a threat that seems to move through the imagination as quickly as through metal. The cockpit was hit. Burning alcohol from a damaged compass struck Walker. Instruments were damaged. The aircraft was being opened up while the attacks continued. At that moment, the Sunderland's size was both curse and blessing. It was easier to hit. It was harder to finish. 4 engines, a large hull, separate crew positions, and multiple defensive guns gave the men aboard a chance. Not a clean chance, not a generous chance, a narrow one, held open second by second. Walker had to keep the aircraft alive. Simpson had to help make the defense coherent. Flying Officer Kenneth Simpson moved into the astrodome, where he could observe the attackers and help direct the aircraft's response. In a fight coming from several angles, that was more than bravery. It was coordination. Without coordination, a large aircraft becomes a set of isolated stations. With it, the crew can begin to fight as one body. Turrets, hatch guns, and beam positions had to answer attack after attack. The German crews were not taking turns in a training exercise. They were trying to break the Sunderland before the Sunderland could break their rhythm. One detail from this fight shows how preparation became survival. Number 461 Squadron had recently fitted Galley hatch guns. That sounds like a small modification until the aircraft is under attack. A galley belongs to the ordinary life of a long patrol. Food, drink, a corner of routine inside a machine crossing miles of water. In this battle, that space became a firing point. Off-watch crew could man those hatch guns and throw more fire into the angles where the aircraft needed it. That is the hidden engine of the story. The Sunderland did not survive because it was fast. It survived because danger had been distributed around it. The German aircraft judged the target by speed. Speed said the Sunderland was vulnerable. Defensive geometry told a nastier story. An attacking crew wants a safe line. Approach, fire, pass, break away, return. Against a Sunderland, that safe line could shift. The aircraft was still slow, still huge, still being damaged. But each pass brought the attacker into somebody's field of fire. Walker also used height and sea. Flying low over the water could reduce the room for attacks from below. The sea became a boundary, not a shield, but a hard limit that complicated part of the enemy's geometry. The first attacks did not finish the Sunderland, so the Ju-88s came again and again. The battle is often described as lasting around 3/4 of an hour, with roughly 20 attacks. 45 minutes is not a burst of violence. It is an ordeal. Long enough for wounds to worsen, long enough for ammunition to become a question, long enough for damaged equipment to become a second enemy, long enough for every new approach to feel like the one that might finally end it. In the rear turret, Flight Sergeant Ray Goode was knocked unconscious during the action. Later, he continued to operate the turret manually. That detail deserves space. A powered turret is difficult in combat. A manually worked turret inside a damaged aircraft turns defense into physical labor. The machine shakes. The enemy moves. The sea waits below. The body is hurt. The gun still has to move, aim, and fire. Elsewhere in the aircraft, the hatch guns continued to matter. Sergeant Edward Miles was at one of those stations. He was mortally wounded. War records often reduce men to roles: pilot, navigator, gunner, engineer. In the aircraft, each role was a life. Each station was a person with a family, a home, and a future that could disappear in one burst of fire. Miles would not survive. the Sunderland still had to fly. That is one of the cruelest facts of air combat. A crew can suffer death inside the aircraft and still be required to continue. Grief has no room, because the battle has not ended. Survival demands attention before feeling can arrive. The crew of EJ-134 reported major success against their attackers. 3 Ju-88s were claimed destroyed, with further damage claimed against others. Here, the story needs discipline. Air combat claims in the Second World War were often difficult to confirm, especially over water. A crew could honestly report what it believed it saw. A damaged aircraft could fall, vanish, escape, or be recorded differently by the other side.
So the fair version is this.
Walker's crew claimed heavy results, including 3 destroyed. The exact score remains a matter to handle cautiously. The survival does not. That distinction matters. The story is not made powerful by pretending every claim is beyond dispute. It is powerful because 8 German aircraft attacked a huge, slow Sunderland over the Bay of Biscay, and the flying boat did not fall. EJ-134 was badly torn apart. The later damage reports, often remembered through the figure of hundreds of holes, became part of the legend. Damage counts should always be treated carefully, because legends like round numbers. But the broad fact is secure enough. The aircraft was severely damaged. Still, it remained airborne. A clean aircraft flies according to design. A damaged aircraft flies through compromise. The crew had to manage fire, wounds, damaged instruments, failing systems, and the question that now mattered more than any claim. Could they reach land? The fight over the Bay of Biscay was only the first half. The second half was the return. Walker had to nurse the damaged Sunderland back towards Britain across a long stretch of sea. This part of the ordeal is less spectacular than combat, but in some ways it reveals more. There is no clean glory in bringing a broken aircraft home. There is calculation, drag, fuel, pain, control response, crew checks, wounded men. A shoreline that exists first as hope and only later as land. Cornwall became the aim. Pra Sands became the ending. The Sunderland could not make a normal return to base. It came down near the Cornish coast. The aircraft was lost, but many of the men aboard survived. The beach saved the living. The aircraft had done its work. It would be easy to tell this as a simple triumph. 8 German aircraft attack. The flying Porcupine survives. British design wins. That version is too clean. Edward Miles was killed. Others were wounded. No. 461 Squadron would lose more men in the months that followed. The Sunderland was hard to kill. Not impossible to kill. Coastal Command's war was not made of neat victories. It was made of repetition, risk, and attrition. So this episode should not be remembered as a cartoon victory. It should be remembered as a window into a front of the war that is too often left in the fog. When people picture Britain in the air during the Second World War, they often see the Battle of Britain. Hurricanes, Spitfires, vapor trails, fighter stations, Churchill's words, and the summer of 1940. Those images deserve their place. The air war did not stop at the coastline. Far beyond the famous fighter fields, Coastal Command crews flew across grey water for hours at a time, searching for submarines, shadowing ships, protecting convoys where they could, and entering areas where enemy aircraft could appear with little warning. Their war was less photogenic. It was also essential. The Sunderland belonged to that world. It looked old-fashioned because the sea demanded different answers from the sky. A fighter is built around speed, climb, and maneuver. A maritime patrol flying boat is built around endurance, range, crew space, equipment, and the ability to keep working above water. Against a submarine, endurance matters. Against the Atlantic, size can help. Against fighters, size becomes danger. The Sunderland lived inside that contradiction. It was vulnerable because it was big. It survived because it made that size fight back. The German crews attacking EJ-134 had real advantages. They had speed, they had initiative, they could decide how to begin each pass. The Sunderland could not turn the encounter into a fighter duel. It had to remain itself, large, slower, heavily crewed, bristling with guns, stubbornly hard to finish. That is where danger becomes more complicated than speed. Speed tells you who can catch whom. It does not always tell you who can survive.
In the Bay of Biscay,
The Ju-88s could catch the Sunderland. Destroying it was another matter. Every attack forced them into defensive arcs. Every pass carried risk. Every minute the flying boat stayed in the air gave its crew another chance to adjust. The Sunderland was being damaged, but it was also damaging the attack. That is why the nickname still works. A porcupine does not win by chasing. It survives by making contact costly. The Sunderland was not hunting German aircraft that evening. It was trying to live. Yet by trying to live, it became a problem the attackers could not solve quickly enough. Inside that problem were men. Walker, burned and injured, still had to fly. Simpson, wounded, still had to help direct the defense. Goode, knocked unconscious, still returned to his gun. Miles, mortally wounded, became the cost written into the story. The rest of the crew continued because stopping was not available to them. Aircraft combat over water has a particular cruelty. On land, damage may still leave a field, a road, a crash site within reach of help. Over the Bay of Biscay, the horizon offered little comfort. If the aircraft fell, the sea would decide what happened next. Survival was technical. It was also human. Engineering created the possibility. Training and discipline used it. Geography shaped it. Luck almost certainly had a place, as it so often does in war. A different hit, a different angle, a faster fire, a control failure, a wound in another place, and EJ-134 might have become another loss in the Atlantic Air War. Instead, it became a legend. The legend is stronger when kept honest. The Sunderland was not magic. German weapons were not harmless against it. Courage did not cancel physics. What the action showed was more interesting. Under the right conditions, with the right crew, modifications, defensive layout and handling, a machine that appeared doomed could become extraordinarily difficult to destroy. The flying Porcupine survived because it did not need to become a Spitfire. It did not need to outrun the Ju-88s. It needed enough guns still firing, enough engines still working, enough control still responding, enough men still able to act, enough distance closed before the damage finally won. That was the victory. A battered aircraft still flying, a crew still fighting, a beach in Cornwall after a long return over dangerous water. Behind it sits a larger truth about Britain's war. Britain was not protected only by famous speeches and famous fighters. It was protected by convoy crews, code breakers, dock workers, shipyards, escort vessels, radar stations, factories, merchant sailors, Commonwealth squadrons, and patrol aircraft that spent much of the war over empty-looking sea. Number 461 Squadron RAAF was part of that effort. Australian crews flying from British bases under RAF Coastal Command were not decoration on the edge of the story. They were central to it.
This was Britain's war effort
In its imperial and Commonwealth reality. British aircraft, British command structures, Australian and British crewmen, all tied to Atlantic routes that helped keep the country in the war. That wider truth matters. When EJ-134 limped towards Cornwall, it carried more than battle damage. It carried proof of a neglected front. The sea war was not always dramatic in the way cinema prefers. Much of it was waiting, searching, escorting, reporting, and enduring. It was won through pressure applied over time, patrol after patrol, sighting after sighting, convoy after convoy, submarine after submarine, forced to dive, withdraw, or face attack. EJ-134 did not decide the Battle of the Atlantic. One aircraft could not do that. Its fight over the Bay of Biscay shows why Coastal Command cannot be treated as a footnote. The men aboard that Sunderland were doing the hidden labor of survival. They were protecting routes most civilians never saw, against threats that moved above and below the water. When the German aircraft found them, that hidden labor turned into open combat. A slow flying boat became a battlefield. A patrol became a legend. A nickname became memory. And the Luftwaffe discovered, in the hardest possible way, that catching Britain's flying Porcupine was not the same as bringing it down. If this story changed how you see Britain's war at sea, subscribe to the channel, press the hype button, and tell us in the comments which forgotten British or Commonwealth aircraft, ship, or crew deserves a full episode next. Because some of the most important stories of the Second World War were not written only in the largest battles. They were written in damaged machines, over grey water, by crews who had every reason to fall, and somehow kept flying.